At some point in your spiritual journey, you may notice a quiet, unsettling presence stirring within you. Memories, feelings, and patterns you never thought mattered begin to rise, insistent, demanding attention. Things you once dismissed, fears, insecurities, moments of neglect, suddenly feel alive, urgent, almost tangible. And it is precisely in this unsettling awareness that awakening begins to reveal itself. Alan Watts often said that awakening is not about acquiring something new, but about seeing clearly what has always been there. The child you once were, the part of you that felt unseen, unheard, or vulnerable, begins to make itself known. This inner child speaks not in words, but in feelings, shadows, and subtle urgencies. Watts reminded us that our sense of self is largely a story we tell ourselves, a narrative carefully constructed to survive and navigate the world. Yet beneath this narrative lies the raw, unprocessed life of the child within. The unmet needs, the moments of being unseen or unworthy, the deep longing to be acknowledged. Awakening brings these truths into awareness. And when that happens, the sensations can be intense. You may feel echoes of childhood sadness, pangs of longing, or even a quiet panic that something essential was missing in your early years. You might wonder why these experiences are surfacing now, perhaps when your life appears stable or peaceful. Watts might explain that consciousness grows not in a straight line but in spirals. As awareness expands, deeper layers of reality and of yourself emerge. The child within surfaces not to punish, but to illuminate. You are invited, gently yet persistently, to recognize these feelings, to allow them presence, and to discover their role in your awakening. Imagine a garden, Watts suggested. The garden of your inner self has been tended carefully, yet some seeds were buried too deep, and some weeds ignored. Awakening is sunlight streaming into this garden. Suddenly, seeds long planted sprout, and the weeds you avoided rise to the surface. At first, it may feel chaotic, even uncomfortable. But this is not destruction, it is revelation. You are seeing what was always there, shaping the flow of your life. The inner child is subtle. It may appear as sudden fear, inadequacy, or longing you cannot name. Or it may manifest as patterns repeated unconsciously, pushing people away, self-sabotage, doubt, hesitation. Watts often said that life is a dance, a play of consciousness. The child within is part of that dance, asking only to be noticed, integrated, and loved. Awakening magnifies these patterns because ordinary distractions can no longer hold sway. As Watts observed, most of us are so busy chasing pleasure or avoiding discomfort that we rarely see what lies beneath. Now, in this quiet intensity, the hidden parts of yourself, the memories, the feelings, the pain demand recognition. And the invitation is clear: to observe without judgment, to feel without trying to fix or flee, and to allow what is to simply be. This is not suffering in the ordinary sense, it is presence, the foundation of awakening and the doorway to a deeper consciousness. Consider a pond, Watts might say. Its surface is normally smooth, reflecting clouds and sunlight, hiding all that lies beneath. But when consciousness stirs, the sediment at the bottom rises. The water becomes murky. It can feel alarming, even frightening. But Watts often emphasized that this is not destruction, it is revelation. You are seeing what was always there, shaping the flow of your life. The sediment, the stones, the mud, these are the echoes of childhood, of past hurt, of unmet needs. And in awakening, they are brought to light so that they may finally be seen, understood, and integrated. What the awakened person realizes, according to Alan Watts, is that these early experiences, the pain, the neglect, the moments of feeling unworthy, have never truly gone away. They have quietly guided your behaviors, fears, and desires. Awakening does not erase them, it illuminates them. And once illuminated, these aspects of yourself can become teachers, not enemies. They show you the ways your life has been unconsciously shaped and offer a path toward wholeness, if only you are willing to pay attention. Resistance is natural. You may wish the pain away, wish the old stories didn't exist, wish to be lighter or freer. Watts would remind us that resistance is merely another story the mind tells itself. The inner child cannot be hurried, cannot be forced, cannot be bypassed. The only way forward is through awareness, through gentle presence, and through acceptance. And here lies the gift. As you meet the child you once were, as you allow these feelings to exist without judgment, you begin to discover a depth of being beyond ordinary understanding. Watts often described reality as something to be participated in, not escaped from. The inner child, once frightened and hidden, becomes a guide showing the path to wholeness, not by erasing the past, but by integrating it fully. As awakening unfolds, you may notice that your old strategies for seeking comfort or distraction no longer work. Activities that once brought joy now feel hollow. Watts often pointed out that we spend much of life chasing fleeting pleasures to escape discomfort. And once consciousness expands, the old distractions lose their grip. The inner child, long ignored or suppressed, rises to the surface, and with it comes a profound awareness. You cannot run from yourself. Every attempt to fill the emptiness with external stimulation, new hobbies, relationships, or achievements, offers only temporary relief. True integration, Watts emphasized, comes from presence, not avoidance. Imagine a room illuminated by a single candle, Watts suggested. The shadows dance on the walls, entertaining you, capturing your attention. These shadows are the small joys and distractions we cling to, the temporary gratifications that mask deeper longing. Awakening opens a door and bright daylight floods in. At first, the light is almost painful, the shadows vanish. Everything familiar feels gone. You may panic, thinking life has become dull, colorless, meaningless. Yet Watts reminds us, this is not loss, it is revelation. The candlelight was never all of reality. It was only the limited perspective of a mind distracted. Now, in the daylight, you can see clearly not the shadows, but the whole landscape of being. This is what happens when childhood pain surfaces in awakening. The old coping mechanisms, the patterns that once helped you survive, no longer satisfy. The inner child's voice becomes louder, asking for acknowledgement, understanding, and compassion. Watts often said that life is a play of consciousness, and the child within is a vital character in that play. By meeting this child, by sitting with the discomfort and allowing it to exist, you are participating in a transformation that is both tender and profound. You may feel fear, helplessness, or frustration. You may wonder if something is wrong with you. Watts would gently remind you, nothing is wrong. The intensity you feel is part of the awakening process. It is the unveiling of what has always been present but unseen, the emergence of the child who has been waiting for recognition. By observing without judgment, by being present with what is, you begin to integrate the past into the richness of your conscious experience. And slowly, imperceptibly, the tension begins to soften. The old urgency to escape dulls. The inner child is no longer an intruder but a teacher, guiding you toward wholeness. Watts emphasized that this process cannot be rushed, forced, or controlled. It is a gentle unfolding, a river that flows at its own pace. Your task is simple yet profound. Show up, observe, and allow. Now, as you begin to allow presence to meet the pain of childhood, you may notice subtle shifts. The feelings that once seemed overwhelming start to transform. Watts often reminded us that life is not about achieving ecstatic states or constant pleasure, but about being fully present with what is. The inner child, once hidden and fearful, now becomes a guide, illuminating patterns, fears, and longings that were shaping your life unconsciously. By observing these patterns without judgment, you step into a deeper understanding of yourself, and awakening begins to feel less like chaos and more like revelation. Think of your consciousness as a river, as Watts often suggested. The inner child, with its memories and unresolved pain, is like stones lying in the riverbed. At first, these stones create turbulence, making the flow of your life feel obstructed, rough, or chaotic. Awakening does not remove the stones by force. Instead, by bringing awareness and acceptance to them, they become part of the river's beauty. They shape the flow, adding texture, depth, and meaning. In this way, the child's presence is not an obstacle but a teacher, revealing what you need to know about yourself and your journey. You may feel tempted to rush, to seek methods or shortcuts to quiet the child or erase the pain. Watts would caution against this. The inner child cannot be hurried. Healing and integration unfold in their own rhythm, like the tide moving in and out, like clouds drifting across the sky. Your role is to show up consistently with curiosity and patience to witness, to feel, and to allow. This is the path of true awakening, not a race to escape discomfort, but a gentle, persistent presence with what is. And here is the subtle magic of this process. As you practice presence with the inner child, the old urgency to escape fades. The patterns of distraction, avoidance, and compulsive seeking begin to lose their grip. Watts emphasized that much of our suffering comes from resisting what is, from trying to control or eliminate discomfort. By allowing the child to exist, you discover that wholeness and completeness have always been present, waiting for your awareness to recognize them. The journey is not always comfortable. There will be waves of frustration, sudden surges of sadness, and moments when it feels like nothing is changing. But Watts would remind you, this is normal. The turbulence is part of the unfolding, part of the process of integrating the inner child and awakening fully. With time and presence, you will notice a remarkable shift. The child is no longer just a source of pain, it becomes a guide, a companion, and a doorway into a deeper, richer experience of life. As you move deeper into this process, you begin to notice a shift in how you relate to life itself. Alan Watts often emphasized that life is not about acquiring pleasures or avoiding pain, but about fully participating in the dance of consciousness. The inner child, with all its wounds and unmet needs, is part of that dance. When you stop resisting, when you stop trying to push the child away or numb the feelings, you begin to experience a subtle richness, a depth of being that is not dependent on circumstances. The pain, the fear, the memories, they do not vanish, but they lose their urgency. You begin to recognize that true wholeness has always been present, even in the midst of suffering. Watts frequently contrasted ordinary happiness with a deeper sense of okayness. Ordinary happiness comes and goes, dependent on conditions being just right, on desires being fulfilled. Okayness, by contrast, is a fundamental recognition that everything is complete exactly as it is. This is what emerges when the inner child is acknowledged and integrated. You may not feel the ecstatic highs of old pleasures, but you feel something far more enduring, a quiet, resilient wholeness that persists regardless of life's fluctuations. You might notice that old patterns of distraction, avoidance, and compulsive seeking begin to soften. As Watts observed, most of our activity is fueled by a desire to escape discomfort or chase fleeting satisfaction. The inner child, however, asks only to be seen and loved. By meeting it with attention, compassion, and curiosity, you allow the river of consciousness to flow more freely. The turbulence caused by unresolved childhood experiences becomes less threatening. It becomes part of the texture of your awareness, a teacher rather than a source of suffering. This process is not linear. Some days you may feel lighter, more present, and connected. Other days, the pain may surge, old memories may arise unexpectedly, and the inner child may feel raw and vulnerable. Watts often reminded us that this is not a failure or setback. It is the natural rhythm of awakening. Presence, patience, and acceptance are the keys. There is no timeline, no schedule, no rush. You are learning to sit with what is, to feel without judgment, and to allow the full spectrum of your consciousness to exist. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, a remarkable truth emerges. You are not defined by your childhood pain. The inner child is not a limitation, but a gateway to greater awareness. As Watts taught, we are not our stories. We are the awareness in which our stories unfold. By witnessing, integrating, and honoring the child within, you are stepping into a deeper, more expansive consciousness. Awakening, in this sense, is not the absence of difficulty, but the full embrace of life as it is, in all its complexity. As you continue to engage with the inner child, something profound begins to emerge. Alan Watts often spoke of life as a river, flowing naturally, carrying everything within it. The childhood wounds, the unresolved pain, the fears and insecurities, they are like stones lying in the riverbed. At first, these stones create turbulence, stirring currents and eddies that make life feel obstructed or chaotic. But awakening, Watts reminds us, does not remove these stones by force. Instead, by bringing awareness and acceptance to them, they become part of the river's beauty. They shape the flow, giving depth, texture, and meaning to your consciousness. You may feel a temptation to seek methods, techniques, or shortcuts to quiet the inner child, to erase the pain, or to rush through the process. Watts would caution against this. The child cannot be hurried. Integration unfolds in its own rhythm, like clouds drifting across the sky or tides moving in and out. Your role is simple yet profound. Show up, witness, and allow. Nothing more, nothing less. Presence is the key. By observing the inner child without interference, judgment, or resistance, You participate in a transformation that is subtle but deeply lasting. And here lies the hidden gift. As you cultivate presence, the old compulsions to escape or distract gradually dissolve. The inner child, once a source of confusion and fear, begins to feel like a guide rather than a burden. Watts often emphasized that much of our suffering arises from resisting what is, from attempting to control or eliminate discomfort. By accepting the child's presence, by allowing the past to surface, you discover a quiet completeness that has always existed. You realize that wholeness is not something to acquire. It is already here, waiting to be recognized. This recognition does not always feel dramatic or exciting. You may still experience waves of sadness, frustration, or longing. Yet in these moments, Watts would remind you that everything is part of the unfolding. The turbulence is not a sign of failure, but a sign of awareness rising. The child is teaching you to move from avoidance to integration, from unconscious repetition to conscious presence. Over time, the inner child becomes less a source of fear and more a doorway to wisdom. You begin to understand that the pain you carry is not separate from your awakening. It is the path through which awakening occurs. Watts often said that life is to be participated in, not escaped from. By embracing the child within, by witnessing and integrating your early experiences, you are participating fully in the dance of consciousness, allowing yourself to awaken more completely, deeply, and authentically. As you allow yourself to be fully present with the inner child, a subtle yet profound shift occurs. Alan Watts often distinguished between ordinary happiness, which rises and falls with circumstances, and a deeper sense of okayness, a fundamental recognition that everything is complete exactly as it is. The child within, once hidden and wounded, now becomes a source of insight and guidance. The old compulsions to seek distraction, to chase pleasure, or to avoid discomfort gradually lose their grip. You begin to see that true awakening is not about achieving ecstatic highs or eliminating pain. It is about being fully present, fully aware, and fully yourself, exactly as you are. The process is not always comfortable. There will be days when the child's pain feels raw, when old memories resurface unexpectedly, when the longing or fear seems overwhelming. Watts would remind us that this turbulence is not a failure but a natural rhythm of consciousness awakening to itself. Presence, patience, and acceptance are the keys. Each moment of attention, each acknowledgement of the child, gradually transforms fear into awareness, resistance into integration, and suffering into insight. What emerges through this process is a new understanding of your own life. The inner child, once a source of limitation or confusion, becomes a doorway to a richer, deeper consciousness. Watts frequently emphasized that we are not our stories. We are the awareness in which our stories unfold. By observing and embracing the child within, you are participating in a transformation that is both tender and profound. You are learning to witness the entirety of your being without judgment, without force, and without expectation. The beauty of this awakening lies in its subtlety. It is not a sudden burst of joy or an ecstatic peak experience. It is a quiet wholeness, a persistent sense of being enough, a deep, enduring connection to life as it is. The inner child, the pain, the longing, they do not vanish, but they become integrated into a larger, more complete awareness. Watts often suggested that this recognition is like seeing a landscape in its entirety for the first time, noticing details and connections that were previously invisible, and realizing that the whole has always been present. In this way, the inner child is no longer a source of fear or limitation. It is a teacher, a guide, and a mirror of your own consciousness. Through the gentle, persistent practice of presence and acceptance, you discover that the depth of awakening lies not in avoiding difficulty or seeking pleasure, but in embracing life fully, with all its textures, shadows, and light. The child within, once silent and hidden, now helps you navigate the terrain of your own consciousness with clarity, compassion, and wisdom. Finally, as this process deepens, you begin to understand the ultimate lesson of awakening and the inner child. Alan Watts often reminded us that life is not about escaping suffering, chasing fleeting pleasures, or achieving perfection. It is about fully participating in the flow of consciousness, seeing clearly what is, and allowing everything pain, joy, longing, fear to be part of your experience. The inner child, once ignored or suppressed, is now a companion and teacher. Its presence illuminates the unconscious patterns that shaped your life, revealing both the sources of your suffering and the keys to your wholeness. You may notice that the old sense of urgency to seek joy or avoid discomfort gradually softens. The inner child no longer triggers panic or helplessness, but invites you to explore, witness, and integrate. Watts often said that we are not separate from reality but an expression of it, like waves on the ocean of consciousness. By meeting the child within, you align more deeply with the rhythm of life, recognizing that every feeling, memory, and impulse is part of the natural flow. You are not broken. You are whole, simply waiting to recognize it. Awakening through the lens of childhood pain does not remove suffering, but it transforms it. Watts taught that the recognition of reality as it is brings a freedom deeper than happiness, a freedom rooted in understanding, acceptance, and presence. The inner child, with all its vulnerabilities, becomes a gateway to this freedom. By allowing yourself to sit with memories, feelings, and longings without judgment, you discover a quiet completeness that cannot be taken away. This is not dramatic. It may not feel extraordinary at first, yet it is the foundation upon which lasting peace, clarity, and wisdom are built. And here is the subtle paradox Watts highlighted. The very thing you once feared, the raw presence of the inner child, the unprocessed pain, the memories you wished would disappear, is exactly what leads to awakening. Resistance only prolongs suffering. Acceptance and presence transform pain into guidance, fear into insight, and fragmentation into wholeness. The child within is not a problem to solve, but a teacher to embrace, showing you the path to living fully awake and aware. So when you notice old wounds rising, when the echoes of childhood pain surface, do not despair. As Watts would say, life is a play, and you are both the actor and the audience. The inner child is calling not for rescue, but for acknowledgement, presence, and love. By meeting this call, you awaken not to an external world of perfection, but to the internal reality of completeness, connection, and being alive exactly as you are. This is the ultimate gift of awakening, the recognition that you have always been whole, that every moment, even the painful ones, carries meaning, and that the inner child once hidden is now a guide into the deepest realms of consciousness. The journey does not end. It flows, unfolds, and evolves, but you walk it with a newfound clarity, courage, and compassion. And in this, you are truly alive, awake, and free.